Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Leia Washington. I am an associate manager at the Partnership for Public Service. I'm also joined by my colleague, Amiko, who will introduce herself now.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amiko Matsumoto. I serve as a senior executive coach and facilitator at the partnership. Prior to this, I did have experience in higher ed and in the federal government as well. So it's a pleasure to be joining you today.
Thanks, Amiko. So before we jump right into the presentation, we wanted to give you a brief overview of the Partnership for Public Service, which is the organization that Amiko and I work for. So we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with the very broad mission of making a more effective government for the American people. We do this in many different ways, from advocating for legislation that will improve the civil service to training federal employees in crucial leadership skills and everything in between. The federal workforce team specifically strives to inspire the next generation of federal leaders to serve in the government, which is why we're grateful for opportunities like this one to talk directly to students or people who are looking to join the civil service. We also administer a couple of internship and fellowship programs to get people direct exposure into government, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So we're really excited to be talking with you today. So here's a brief agenda of what we'll cover today. So first, we'll do a little federal government overview just to do some level setting. We'll discuss where you might fit within the large organization that is the federal government and what a career in federal service might look like for you. Then we'll go into why federal government. So we'll discuss some of the perks and the benefits of choosing a career in government. And then next, we'll talk about getting into federal government. So once you are sufficiently inspired to choose a career in public service, we'll talk about ways that you can do that, from internship programs to fellowship programs to applying directly to federal opportunities via USAjobs. And then at the end, we'll talk about some resources that you can use after this presentation is over to really begin your search and help you apply to jobs in the most efficient way. And then finally, we'll save time at the end for the Q&A. So we welcome you to put questions in the Q&A throughout the presentation. Amiko and I might take a stab at answering some of them while the presentation is going on, but we will also have time at the end to answer some of those questions verbally. So we will just jump right in and begin with our federal government overview. So this slide may seem a little bit elementary, but what we want to do is just show you all the opportunities that exist within government. So public service careers and careers in government can mean many different things, from working on the Hill to working for a good government nonprofit organization like the Partnership. But when we talk about federal government in this presentation, we are specifically referring to executive branch agencies. That being said, all three branches work together to provide very important services to the American people, and they're not completely independent of one another. So we might reference some opportunities that exist on the Hill or in the judicial branch as well. So one of the ways that we like to talk about why you should consider a career in government or what a career in government could look like is by talking about some of the things that it's not. So we have a list of common myths we hear about federal government that we've compiled from talking to students and people who want to get into government but are hesitant for one reason or another. So these are the reasons some people often list, and we want to combat some of these ideas. So the first is that government is not innovative. People think that government is not modern and it's behind the times, behind the private sector, etc. Innovation is happening all throughout government. So there's a lot of different ways that we could talk about the innovation that's happening throughout government. Specifically, we like to highlight people who are doing innovative work. So one of my favorite examples is a man named Griffin Rogers, who works at the National Institute of Health, or NIH. He developed the first effective drug treatment for sickle cell disease, which affects over 100,000 Americans and millions more worldwide. So he developed a drug treatment to lessen the pain and suffering of those with sickle cell disease, and oversaw a stem cell transplant clinical trial that reversed debilitating illness in a majority of patients. I actually got the opportunity to talk to Griffin Rogers, and he said that this would have not been possible without the resources of NIH. They gave him a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of space to really carry out this clinical trial. And he said if had he been in the private sector, they would have wanted results a little bit more quickly and wouldn't have had the funding for him. And so he really was able to do this because of the opportunities presented to him at his federal agency. There's tons of other examples of people doing innovative work. We also like to point out an example that's relevant to this time. So the Department of State spearheaded what's called the Virtual Student Federal Service. which is a program that facilitates the expansion of virtual internships throughout government, as they recognize that traditional internships are not feasible for all students. This program was implemented a couple years ago, so even before COVID. And so when COVID hit and a lot of agencies had to move to telework, they already had this infrastructure in place to facilitate virtual internships. So just one way that government is kind of ahead of the curve. We also often hear that students must move to Washington, D.C. to work for the federal government. While it's true that the largest majority of civil servants are located in DC, 85% of federal jobs are located outside of the Washington area. So there's really federal opportunities all throughout the country and even overseas, as Amiko will talk about a little bit later. The next thing that we often hear is that the federal government isn't a good employer, or that just working for an agency, you won't have a good experience. And so there's a lot of different ways we could talk about combating this. One thing that we like to point out is the best places to work in the federal government rankings, which are put out every year based on a survey that federal employees take. 89% of federal employees say that the work that they do is important. And many federal employees feel that they are really aligned with their mission. They feel the work that they're doing aligns with the skills that they have, and that they're dedicated to the mission of their agency. Some agencies even rank higher than the private sector in terms of employee engagement and overall job satisfaction. The next thing that we hear is that federal government is inherently political. And so while we don't want to just say politics has nothing to do with federal government, we will recognize that civil service is affected by politics, but it is not inherently political. So there's a revolving door of political appointees at the highest level, but the majority of the civil service is nonpartisan and focused on the priorities or the mission of the agency that doesn't change from administration to administration. And then the final thing that we'll talk about, which we will address in a couple of slides as well, is that a lot of people think that they have to work in public administration or have a political science degree in order to work for the federal government. So the federal government is the largest employer in the country, so there's really a job for every single interest, whether that's accounting or engineering or any field really, there's a federal job that exists for you. And we'll talk about that in a few slides. So here is just a quick overview of what the federal government looks like. There are more than 400 agencies and subcomponents across the country, and over 2.1 million federal civilian employees staffing them. So like I said on the previous slide, the federal government is the largest employer in the country, so there's plenty of opportunities that exist. Whether you want to work at one of the largest agencies, so there's 15 cabinet level agencies, or you want to work at the more than 400 subcomponents, there's definitely opportunities in every single agency in every field. So going back to that myth on 2 slides ago, that students must work in public administration in order to work for the government. We wanted to use this slide to highlight all the different fields that the federal government is hiring in. So each agency has many different functions. They need specialists that will carry out their missions, but they also need support functions for their operations. So you can see on the left-hand side, some support functions. These functions create an internal process at an agency in order to get things done. They also need people to carry out their missions. So for example, NASA needs scientists and engineers, NIH needs medical doctors, the Department of Justice needs lawyers, etc. This is just a generic example, but we can look at a specific agency to see how this might play out. So for example, the Department of Veterans Affairs, their mission is to provide healthcare for veterans. So they need doctors and nurses and hospital staff to actually carry out that mission of providing healthcare to veterans in their veteran hospitals. But they also need employees to carry out support functions. So like any other business, they need those in budgeting and finance, human capital, technology, management, legislative affairs, policy, and more. And then finally, we want to show you some specific agencies that are hiring in fields that you all might be interested in. So this slide shows the top agencies that are hiring engineers. So you can see Department of Defense, NASA, Department of Transportation, Agriculture, and Interior are all agencies that are hiring employees in employees in engineering in very high numbers. And on the right-hand side, you can see the top engineering fields or the type of engineers that they're hiring. So this is just to show that there's plenty of agencies that people with degrees in engineering can work for. On the next slide is very similar. Instead of engineering, we have agencies that are hiring for people with IT and computer science backgrounds. So again, we have Department of Defense, Treasury, Veterans Affairs, Homeland Security, and Social Security Administration, which might not be the first things that you think of when you think of IT, but definitely agencies that are hiring high numbers of IT employees. And then on the right-hand side here, you can see a sample position. So what a career in IT look like in the federal government. This is a real sample position that I just pulled from USAjobs. So this specific position is at the Department of Justice, specifically within the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And they need an IT specialist to oversee implementation of new system hardware and software by developing operating procedures. So you could go on USAjobs and search IT specialists and see plenty of jobs like this in your specific field. And now I'm going to pass it over to Amiko to talk about some of the other benefits for working in the federal government.
Thanks, Leah. And for those of you who just thought USAjobs, I'm not sure if I'm that familiar with it. We will be covering that in a few sections. So please be patient. We'll get there soon. With regard to kind of why the federal government, there are lots of different reasons why people pursue the federal government as an employer. I want to cover a few things for you here. Again, to dispel some of the myths that Leah's mentioned earlier, and then just to give you an overview of the types of benefits that are available through the federal government as well. So one, there's just an opportunity to make just a tremendous difference. If we think about the mission of the government, mission of specific agencies, a lot of folks really want to find meaning in their work, and to be in an agency that's working so specifically on areas that folks find important to them is one opportunity. The government is kind of a tremendous funder in a lot of different ways. If you care about homelessness or hunger, for example, kind of no bigger funder in many of those areas than the federal government. And policy drives so much of what's happening in those spaces. So it's just a great way to make a tremendous impact. Also, if we think about the scope of the federal government, as an example, there are more than 100 job opportunities in more than 100 countries worldwide in working for the federal government. So the reach is quite vast. We think about the benefits. We didn't cover all of them here, but just a few we wanted to highlight. This work-life balance, or perhaps better stated as integration, is something that's been important to the federal government even before COVID hit. There are telework schedules, flex schedules, lots of different ways in which people schedule their work. So to accommodate different kind of more personal needs as well. There are some agencies that do provide student loan repayment assistance. That's oftentimes for very specific agencies or very specific jobs. So it's not kind of all of DOE, for example, but there may be Department of Energy, there may be kind of a specific job where that might be affiliated. It's worth looking into if it's something that you're interested in. There are also other programs like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program for which you would be applicable or eligible. The other thing that we'll highlight here is just the health and retirement benefits package. So if you look at the total compensation for federal employment, it's oftentimes much greater than the salary, given the benefits of health and retirement that are included in federal employment. Mission alignment, I mentioned, is something, and especially as we think about folks that are really wanting to find a way to use their skills and interest in something that that's important to them. There's just a lot of different ways to do that. As Leah mentioned, the different types of agencies and types of jobs in government are really varied and provide a lot of different opportunities. There is a lot to be said for the type of work experience that people get, as well as the training and development that's offered. We're going to cover pathways in a moment where training and development is kind of built in, but that's true for a lot of other positions in government as well, and that something to be considered. Moving to the next slide, wanted to just highlight a couple of folks for you here. Sometimes in that kind of meaningful work piece, people are kind of looking for tangible examples. So we wanted to provide a few folks here just as some examples. Donna Dodson is NIST Chief Cybersecurity Advisor. In her role there, she was instrumental in the development of the NIST cybersecurity framework. This is a seminal guide that has been used by thousands of public and private organizations around the world to help make decisions on how to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber attacks from criminal hackers and foreign governments. The framework not only helps organizations understand their cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities, but also how to mitigate these risks and with customized measures. The framework also offers some guidance for organizations to respond to and recover from cybersecurity incidents. So besides the federal government, many companies have embraced this framework, including JP Morgan Chase, Microsoft, and Boeing. And then we also wanted to highlight Dr. Beth Ripley here for you. Dr. Ripley is the National Director for VA for 3D Printing Network and the 2020 Science and Environmental Science Service to American Medals finalists. There is a website that the partnership has that we can put in the chat. If you're interested in learning more about the SAMMYs finalists, as we refer to them in short, and winners, you can certainly learn more about them and get just a much different type of understanding of the work that's being done in government. With regard to Dr. Ripley, she's developed an interconnected hospital-based 3D printing network that was designed to share resources and knowledge throughout the Veterans Health Administration. That network has grown from 3 to more than 30 hospitals, has benefited over 1,000 veterans. It's reduced surgical times by over an hour on average, and has really prevented unnecessary surgeries and many other benefits there. Most recently, and most relevant to this time, the network of VA hospitals has begun to design and produce PPE and ventilators to aid in the national coronavirus response. So here are just a couple examples of the type of work that can be done through federal employment, and we hope you consider as you move forward in your search. And with that, Leah, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Amiko. So next, we're going to talk about some ways to actually get into federal government. So we'll share some programs that you can use to do that, and then tips and tricks for navigating the federal application process. So to begin, we'll talk about the Pathways programs, because this is the most common and recognized internship program in government. So Pathways actually refers to 3 different programs. In 2010, former President Barack Obama signed the Hiring Reform Initiative, which created the Pathways program. So it took various government programs and put them under one umbrella of Pathways. So these programs make it easier for students to get involved with the federal government and take advantage of all the opportunities that it offers. So the 3 programs that are under the umbrella of Pathways are the Pathways Internship Program, the Pathways Recent Graduate Program, and then the Presidential Management Fellows Program. They're all fairly similar, but for different levels, and we'll talk about each in a little bit more detail. So the first one that we'll talk about that we'll skim over, because looking in the chat, it looks like a lot of you have already graduated school, so we'll just go through this one fairly quickly. But the Pathways Internship Program is what you consider kind of a traditional internship experience. So these are paid opportunities to intern at a federal agency for a limited period of time, usually about 1 year. Once you complete this program successfully, you're eligible to be hired for full-time employment or eligible for conversion, which is a term you might hear, which basically just means that the agency can hire you on full-time after you complete your internship, which is a huge benefit because if you go through a third-party program or some other programs, you may or may not be eligible for conversion. So if you want to stay at the agency, going through Pathways, it makes it a little bit easier. So this opportunity is for current undergraduate or graduate students who are currently enrolled in qualifying educational institutions and programs. So this would be somebody looking for a summer internship or a semester internship. The way that this differs from student volunteer positions, which you might see at many agencies, is that student volunteer positions are traditionally unpaid, whereas Pathways internship programs are paid. And I see a question in the Q&A asking if the Pathways programs have a typical hiring cycle or timeline each year. So this is something that confuses a lot of people looking for Pathways internships. They don't necessarily coincide with the academic semesters as a traditional internship would. So some agencies, actually many agencies might try to do it on that cycle. So they'll say, okay, summer's coming up, we need some summer interns, or fall or spring, but they can really be hired for at any point in the year for any period of time. So it could be an internship from March to the end of the year. You just kind of have to take it by the job announcement and the specific agency that's doing the hiring. So next program that we're going to talk about is the Pathways Recent Graduates program. So this is fairly similar to the Pathways internship program, but as the title suggests, it's for recent graduates. So this can be recent graduates of undergrad, even associate's degrees or graduate level degrees, as long as you're graduating from a qualifying educational institution. This program is a little bit different than the internship program in that it's really supposed to be a professional development opportunity. So in addition to the work experience that you gain through this program, participants also receive an orientation, receive up to 40 hours of training and development, and they also have to complete an IDP or an individual development plan, which lays out their goals and what they're hoping to achieve throughout their internship experience. Once you successfully complete this program, you are also eligible for conversion similar to the Pathways internship program. And then the recent graduates part refers to the fact that you have to apply within 2 years of receiving your degree. Exceptions are made for veterans who are completing a tour of duty. They have up until 6 years to apply to the program. And then the final Pathways program that we'll talk about is the Presidential Management Fellows program. So this is, again, a leadership development program at the entry level for advanced degree candidates. So created more than 30 years ago, this program attracts and selects from among the best candidates and is designed to develop a cadre of potential federal government leaders. This is one of the most prestigious programs in government right now. I highly suggest checking it out if you are interested in this program. The eligibility for this program, again, is individuals who have completed their education within the last 2 years with a qualifying advanced degree. So a master's, a JD, a professional degree, etc. To apply for this program, applications are open for only 2 weeks in the fall, typically late September to early October timeframe, and they post it months in advance. But you only have 2 weeks to apply, and then you apply to the program, and if you're selected as a finalist, a whole host of opportunities are opened up just for PMF finalists. So you'll still have to apply to a different agency or to different positions, but those positions are only available to PMF finalists. Once you're in the program and you have a position, participants will go on to receive an orientation, 80 hours of training and development, again, complete that individual development plan, and are assigned a mentor as well. Then we'll briefly run through some other internship and fellowship programs. So a lot of programs are run by third parties or other entities that we highly suggest that you check out if you're interested. So we'll just briefly go through a couple of those. So the first is a cybersecurity talent initiative. So this is an opportunity for recent graduates in cybersecurity fields to gain cross-sector work experience. So this program involves 2 years in the federal government and then 2 years in the private sector. Throughout that time, you'll also receive leadership development training and mentorship. And then you also have an opportunity for student loan assistance. So if you're selected for a private sector position after the 2 years in federal government, you can receive up to $75,000 in student loan assistance. The next one is the Congressional Innovation Fellowship. So this program aims to bridge the divide between Congress and the tech sector by placing tech-savvy candidates to work with members of Congress and congressional committees. So this is an opportunity for early to mid-career technology professionals. Usually they're looking for people who have at least 5 years of experience, of work experience or postgraduate study for this program. And this program is a year-long fellowship, which you receive stipends and benefits as well. The next program is the Presidential Innovation Fellowship Program. You also might hear this referred to as the PIF program. But this program is an opportunity for PIFs to work hand in hand with federal agency leaders. And the PIF program identifies innovative opportunities at different agencies, and it's more of a project-based program. So PIF might send a fellow to work in one agency on a project that they need help with. The fellows advise, prototype, and scale solutions using industry best practices across data science, design, engineering, product, and systems thinking. All Presidential Innovation Fellows are hired at the GS-15 level. So this is a bit of a higher level. Amiko will talk about what GS levels mean in a little bit, but this is more for people who are mid-career or later in their career. And then in addition on this application, all candidates select a track that they're most interested in. So the tracks are AI, data and analytics, product, design and experience, digital strategy, software and infrastructure. So all different types of opportunities. And then the final program that we'll talk about is the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. So this fellowship program is open for those who have a doctorate or a master's degree specifically in engineering. Fellows, similar to the Presidential Innovation Fellows or the Congressional Internship, fellows serve a year-long assignment in a selected area of the executive, legislative, or judicial branch of the federal government, and again, help bridge that gap between the public sector and the technology sector. So other ways that you can find careers in federal government. So you can look at agency websites. So some examples are on the screen, but career.state.gov, that's run by the State Department. So if you know you want to work for a specific agency, for example, the State Department, you could go on that website and see all of the internship and career opportunities that exist. Many agencies have really similar websites. We've also linked one for the intelligence community, but several agencies have their own as well. You can also explore local and virtual federal hiring events, such as hiring fairs that are often associated with universities. That's a good place for federal agencies to come and tell you more about the work that they do. And then government internship programs through universities or third-party entities. So we touched on a few, but for example, the Partnership for Public Service, we run 3 internship and fellowship programs, and there's a whole host of other third-party entities that provide opportunities in government as well. Government service programs such as Peace Corps or AmeriCorps are also really good opportunities. You might get special hiring preference when you come back from these opportunities. So if you know that working for the federal government is something you want to do eventually, starting with one of these programs could be a good place. And then finally, we'll talk about this website at the end of the presentation, but gogovernment.org is a website where a lot of the information that we've talked about today lives, so you can go and check it out at any point. The best way to apply to federal opportunities, though, is through USAjobs. So I'll pass it over to Amiko to talk more about that.
Thanks, Leah. I want to just cover kind of briefly, but try to be as helpful as we can in helping you navigate USAjobs, which is the main portal for government positions. There are, specifically for the executive branch, there are things we'll cover in this section: how to search for positions, how to create a federal resume, how to complete applications, and submitting your application, as well as how to follow up with the agency. So we are going to kind of go through some screenshots. If you are at a computer, you can call up another window to log on to USAjobs.gov. It may be helpful as and kind of follow along that way if you'd like. If you can advance the slide, please. The first thing we want to cover is just the home page here for USAjobs. There are a couple of things to note. On the top left, you can put in keywords. This can be the type of position you're interested in, some of the skills that are affiliated with that. We can talk about series codes in a moment. So maybe a series code that would be helpful for you. You can also put in the location that you're interested in. If you're open, you can leave that blank, and I'll just kind of call up different positions. This keyword search is helpful. It's not perfect. So it's worth it to try to kind of come up with some different combinations or the type of role that you might be interested in to see what else pulls up. There are a couple of things here that I'll highlight with regard to this homepage as well. You'll see there's a way to create a USAjobs profile. And we really encourage you to create a profile for yourself. It'll give you an opportunity to set up searches that you're interested in. You can also create and store federal resumes in there as well, and I'll cover that in a moment. But that's your advantage as you're thinking about how to perhaps apply for positions a little bit more quickly or in a tight turnaround time. There's a little bit here about the application to the federal process. So it kind of walks you through or shares the different steps there. And then this Explore Opportunities tab on the right, it's kind of in the middle of the screenshot here, is a way to kind of look at some of the more urgent needs in government. You can click on a particular position and it will call up all of the positions affiliated with that. One of the challenges is that there's a lot of different levels and different types of other aspects of a job search that may be interesting to you. You see on the right-hand side here on the screen, some of the different ways that you can narrow the search that you have. So that includes if you're looking for a full-time or part-time position. There's kind of a range of things there that will help you kind of narrow the search parameters. So it's going to call up the type of position that you're most interested in. Moving forward with the kind of ways to explore opportunities, wanted to highlight a couple options for you here. Again, you see the, this is once you kind of clicked on those explore opportunities tab, and it calls up different types of positions or different types of fields. Other ways to narrow your search here. You can look for jobs that are open to the public, which for the most part, look like there were a couple of you that are currently at an agency, but for the most part, in your welcome chat, most of you are not affiliated with the federal government yet. So you can click on this open to the public tab and maybe have helped you. There's also different ways demographics break down. So if there's other aspects to your life that apply, you can click these different cells here, and it will again help you narrow your search results so that you get a list that's more tailored to you and your specific interests. One of the challenges that and opportunities is, as you think about searching for federal jobs, is to be aware of the way government positions are classified. And oftentimes it refers to something called a GS level, general schedule here. So we'll have an opportunity for you to look, kind of see these different levels here and help you kind of correspond to the type of search that you may be looking for. You see here the breakdown of GS 4 through 11. These are probably the ones that are most applicable to folks on this call. There are other levels as well. So if you are more advanced in your experience there, you may look at 12s, 13s and above. But you see here kind of the way this breaks down. One of the challenges I think in this too is that for the most part, agencies use this GS schedule. Sometimes they have an alternative personnel schedule. And so you may see something like an NY3 or an NX2. It's not specific to the GS scale, kind of as a one-to-one, but you can kind of get a sense of how that might be equivalent by looking at the pay band. So we're going to kind of highlight some of those next with regard to the way the pay and benefits piece works. So Lee, if you go ahead and advance that slide, you see here kind of the way pay works. One of the challenges, as you'll note, you'll have kind of a base pay in positions, and then you'll have something that's referred to as locality pay. Locality pay takes into account that there's a cost of living difference in certain cities, and so you see here kind of what the equivalent might be for certain cities you may be interested in living. This chart shows you kind of a way to see the progression. So you can come in perhaps as a GS5 or a GS7. Over the next few years, you can advance to become a GS9 or a GS11. So you see how your pay might increase accordingly. One of the things this slide doesn't show, or the previous one, is that the general schedule kind of GS grades also have steps within them. There's 10 steps kind of per grade, and it's things that kind of like think about it as a progression. As you're advancing in your skills, you're kind of moving up within that band. So you can be a GS5 step 3, or a GS5 step 8, for example. And as you kind of go through, your pay increases and your level of responsibility would increase as well. So you just see kind of the progression there. Oftentimes we get asked questions of, if I start here, what's realistic for me to advance in a couple of years? So I wanted to give you some context for how that might occur. I will note that this refers to pay and benefits. We do not include in this things like healthcare benefits or retirement benefits. So this is more specific to pay. And as we talked about earlier, there are other pieces of your total compensation as a federal employee that would then be kind of included in a much higher number than what you see here is more specific to salary. Next slide, please. One of the challenges in USAjobs is that it kind of takes a little bit of decoding and figuring out kind of how to read these different job opportunity announcements. So I want to spend a few moments here to go through that. You'll see in the left-hand side of the overview, one that is accepting applications for that position. You'll note the open and closing dates. This one has a pretty broad range. So it means that position's open a lot longer. Sometimes they're shorter, and especially for the shorter windows, you want to be able to have your materials ready to go as much as possible so you can turn around more quickly. You see the pay scale and grade there. So that's a 12 to 15 position, meaning that you can kind of come in for this role, you can come in anywhere from a 12 to a 15, or you can advance to a 15 at most. So it gives you kind of what that range would be. You see the corresponding salary per year. You'll note that there are multiple appointment types, meaning if you're interested in different types of appointments, and that's kind of in that grouping that I was mentioning earlier, that's helping you narrow down. And then it's a full-time schedule. So the expectation is that this is a full-time position and not a part-time position. It also notes that it's open to the public and has a place for somebody to apply. One of the things to note here is there's an announcement number in the bottom right of this slide, an announcement number for this position. It's really helpful to note that, as well as should be some information if you were to scroll down on this slide or on this page on the website, a contact person. It's really helpful to note those. There are a lot of positions that are open sometimes in agencies, so to know you're referring to this specific position. Within IT, there may be several. So this, for example, will give you an opportunity to kind of trace that. Some of the changes that have been made for USAjobs, you can also track through your account if that's something that's of interest, but helpful for you to kind of know how to navigate this piece of the application process and as you're thinking about applying. If you do hit that apply button, it will sometimes go to a backend system that might look a little bit different from agency to agency. So on the front, kind of the landing page here, things should be pretty consistent, whether you're looking at a position, in this case, at the US Air Force, or if you were to look at something at NIH, the National Institute of Health. But if you were to apply, you may see a very different type of backend system. And that's simply because agencies have their own that they use, different vendors. And sometimes there's different requirements or different things that you need for specific agencies or for specific jobs. So while the front piece here looks very similar, know that it may be something that you're seeing very differently as you move through the application process. We can move on to the federal resume piece. As an applicant, you are able to use more of a standard, to refer to as regular resume here. We really encourage you to spend the time to develop a federal resume. Federal resume can be done through your USAjobs account. It is kind of very field specific, so it will ask for certain types of information and you kind of plug it in as you go. There's a lot more information requested, things like names of supervisors, how many hours you worked, kind of where the location was, and it kind of gives you cell by cell what you need. We really encourage you to spend the time to do a federal resume. One, from a federal HR perspective, it makes it much easier for them. They can find the information that they need much more readily. And it gives you a chance to provide a lot more information about your skills and experience. If we think about a standard resume, oftentimes it's 1 or 2 pages, depending, particularly for entry-level folks. As a federal resume, you can have 1 to 5 pages. As something that's common for entry-level applicants. I've seen federal resumes be, into the 15, 20 page range as folks move through their career. It's a way for you to really highlight everything that you've done related to that role. And as they're thinking about how to classify you as an employee, you kind of make your case for why you should come in, as a 13 instead of a 12. You have different types of experience that's counted for, which then corresponds to pay as well. So it's worth it to use the federal resume format. I will say it takes a lot of time, and if something that you are thinking about doing as far as applying for a federal job at some point, it's worth it to start creating your federal resume sooner rather than later. You can kind of chip away at it over time. It's a little bit overwhelming to try to do this if you were to find a position that closes in 3 days, given many other things you probably have going on. It may be hard to try to develop everything then in that time frame. So we encourage you to build a master federal resume. You have up to 5 federal resumes in your USAjobs account that you can store. So you can have kind of a master, and then say if you have a position that's an analyst position, you can tailor it for what you think might be there versus another type of position. So you have some options that way. The other thing to note about federal resumes is it's worth tailoring them to a specific position. Again, it takes a little bit more time, but a lot of times federal resumes are reviewed first by a computer screen. So if they're asking for a gray sweater, you want to tell them you have a gray sweater and not a charcoal cardigan. There's not the same kind of points for style in the same way, and you want them to pick up on, here are the keywords that they're looking for a particular position, and here is the skill or the experience that you have that's exactly aligned. So it's worth it to kind of go through the job descriptions, make sure that you have as much in there, if they're asking for meeting with certain audiences or having certain type of tech skills, that those are highlighted in your resume so that they're easily found. I have seen some applications where it will say, this is a requirement for the position, and where is this in your resume? And you have to basically cut and paste from the resume to say, this is where it is, and how I'm representing it. So you want to be as clear as possible. The federal resume, again, you don't have the same choice of font or structure. You see kind of how it, on the left-hand side here, this is kind of how it shows up for everybody. So you don't have to worry about some of the same formatting things. It will be a standard cell by cell piece that you'll put in. There's also a lot more options to describe things like affiliations or other types of leadership experience that you may have that might be volunteer leadership that doesn't necessarily fit into a specific professional experience that you've had as a job. So there's just a lot of different ways to provide more information here, and it's worth it to use this format. Moving forward, I covered some of the highlights here, again, of why that's there, and you see the ways to use the federal, or kind of the website to use for the federal resume builder that's online through USAjobs. Moving on to the completing the application. You will submit the application. There's a section in the job opportunity announcement that references how to apply. It's worth reading through that. There are sometimes very specific instructions in there, or specific things that they're looking for as far as criteria. And so it's helpful for you to know that. How you'll be evaluated is also included. There's a lot of transparency within the federal hiring process. So it's worth your time to kind of read through those specific, that specific portion of the job opportunity that's meant to understand what's required. And that will be listed. Sometimes the types of things that could be requested in there, in addition to a resume, they could be asking for college transcripts, certain forms or questionnaires that you'd be asked to complete. So again, for you to know as you're thinking of applying how much time it may take based on the types of different steps that would be a part of your application process is helpful for you as an applicant, so that you can manage your time accordingly and gather the right information that you'll need moving on. As far as what to expect for the process, after you hit reply, you should be getting an automatic reply that your application has been received. There are kind of 4 places in the hiring process usually that applicants are responded to. This would be something that if you had a USAjobs account, it would kind of track through that. It should let you know if you've moved, if your application has been received, if you've moved forward as being a part of any part of the process, or if you have been declined as a candidate. So you should be able to kind of hear or learn from the agency kind of where you are in the process. Sometimes the time really varies. Some agencies move processes very quickly. I know when I was on a search committee one time, when I worked for government, we had to have the same panel, the same people for every part of the process. And we had at one point, somebody's parent passed away. So they were out for a certain amount of time. They came back. We had somebody else get sick. They were out for a certain time, and it just prolonged the process. But because we needed to have all the same people we needed to wait for everybody to be present, and that caused delays. And sometimes, kind of when agencies choose to review varies. So as far as kind of when you'll hear back, on certain decisions, it really does depend on the agency. There is a contact number and name of somebody that's provided in that job opportunity announcement. If it's been a couple weeks since you've submitted your application, you haven't heard anything back, and you want to, to kind of reach out to find your status, it's, you have that person's name to contact. You just want to be aware of any contact you have is as part of the impression you're making as a candidate, and to understand that there may be many other things happening at that agency that may impact the timing of that process. So to be as respectful as possible is always a good thing. And then there are many positions that require a background check or security clearance as part of the process. That should be listed in the job opportunity announcement. So you should know kind of what type of clearance is expected, and kind of what steps would be taken for that. Sometimes with the security clearance process, it does provide additional time for, you may receive a conditional offer, but that security clearance process may take a substantial amount of time depending on the position. And so, to be aware that there may be a delay from when you apply or accepted the position from when you can start, given that security process that may be required. Just a couple, and I'll speak to security clearances in a moment, but other things just to be thinking about as you're looking through USAjobs. It's okay to start looking through positions as soon as possible. There was a question earlier about, when agencies oftentimes release certain positions, and it really does depend on the agency. Some, for example, if they were looking to hire a recent graduate, some may post in the fall, and they have their hiring process because they know they've got security clearance things to get through. They try to do that early so people can be cleared by summertime. Sometimes it depends on the appropriation process of when certain positions can be approved. So there's really no standard, every agency doing the exact same thing type of approach. It really does depend on the agency. And so it's worth starting to look now. Again, each agency is going to have its own process, so you want to be aware of that. Many times agencies will have information about their specific hiring process on their website, and other pieces of information that you may need. Several agencies are also using things like LinkedIn and other types of social media to help inform candidates of what's in play there. So it's helpful to kind of know what's specific to your agency. And then we're going to share some resources in a moment about some other ways to go through, that may be of help to you as you apply. There is a help center on USAjobs and a glossary. There are a lot of different terms. I find specifically in looking through job opportunity announcements, so it's helpful to have that glossary to help inform you if there's something that you're not quite aware of as you go through. With regard to security clearances, a couple things to note here. It's worth starting to gather your information now. There's a form, either the SF-85 or the SF-86, excuse me, that you'll oftentimes need to complete. You can take a look at those forms now, figure out what type of information you may need to have when you apply. And it's, you're as part of the process, so you can start gathering that now. I know when I was in government, I had to provide all the places that I'd lived for the past, I think it was 7 years. And I had been a college student and a graduate student, and I had moved a lot back and forth from campus to home. Trying to find and track down all that information is sometimes it takes a little bit of time. So it's worth to start moving on that now, so you can be ready. If there are some things that are in your past or current life that you think may be problematic for a security clearance, it's worth to start curbing those bad habits now. In particular, there's oftentimes a lot of concern around debt, not understanding like school loans and things, but other types of credit card debt that's significant may come into play. So you want to be diligent in that to to help kind of move through the security clearance a little bit easier. And then we oftentimes get questions of like, what if I've done something that's perhaps not, kind of the best moment of my character? What should I do in that situation? It's really worth it to be honest. Each agency is going to have a tolerance for certain behaviors and certain positions. If you've had something, it doesn't mean that it would automatically kick you out of the process. But if you lie and they catch you in a lie, then you will almost certainly not be moved forward in that process. So it's better to be honest and and be upfront with what's happened as opposed to hope they don't find something out. Usually fairly thorough, and so you want to be honest as you go through. Again, there's more information on USAjobs, and there are a lot of other vendors that have security clearance information. So if it's something you're interested in, you can find out more that way. There is a question in the chat around if you've moved around a lot. It's not necessarily problematic if you've moved a lot, but you want to be able to disclose where you've moved, depending on the level of clearance. Sometimes they may need to find somebody who can verify that you live there, and provide a character witness for your time, at that place. So again, worth it to start looking through that information now and gathering that information now so you can have that ready to go. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Leah to walk through or share with you some of the resources that we have.
Thanks, Amiko. So yeah, we've compiled just a list of some quick resources if you want more information after this presentation. So we'll go through them fairly quickly. So the first is gogovernment.org. This is a website run by the Partnership for Public Service, and it's a one-stop shop for all things federal hiring. So here you can find information on how to navigate USAjobs, tips on federal resumes, points to keep in mind when looking for finding your fit in government, etc. So pretty much everything that we've covered in this presentation lives somewhere on gogovernment.org. You can also, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, this is a screenshot of gogov.org. There's a little section, you might not be able to read it, but it says, who are you? So you can filter if you're a student or a recent graduate or a veteran, etc., to find special hiring authorities or paths that might work best for you. There's also a section called the career guides. So this is a really good page to go to if you're not sure how your degree might be useful in government. So the career guides are separated by major or field of study. So you can go and look at one specifically for engineering and see which agencies are hiring in engineering, sample positions in engineering, and just some more information on how that degree might be applicable in government. And we have them for pretty much every type of area. The next resource is bestplacestotwork.org. So this is the rankings that we mentioned earlier. They're put out every year based on a survey that federal employees fill out. And this can be a helpful resource as you begin your search if you're not sure which agency you want to work for. So here you can find data on what makes each agency a unique place to work. And this can be a great talking point for a cover letter or something to bring up during an interview, or you can filter your search on what's most relevant to you. So if you know you want to work for an agency with high employee engagement, or an agency where employees really feel aligned to their mission, you can figure out which agencies those are using the best places to work rankings. The next resource that we recommend is agency websites and social media. So this is a really good place if you're a little intimidated by USAjobs and just want to get a feel for different positions before you begin the actual application process. So many agencies will use their own career page or social media platforms to promote different opportunities, either before or while they're available on USAjobs. So you can follow them on social media to stay up to date on positions or internships, or you can browse their careers page to just see the types of options that are available, and then you can go and search those specific options on USAjobs. The next, which Amiko referenced, is the USAjobs Help Center. So I will actually link in the chat a direct link to the Help Center. You can also find it by going to usajobs.gov and just scrolling all the way to the bottom to the help section. But this is a really good resource if you just kind of don't know where to start or you have any specific questions during the application process. They have all sorts of information. So they have an FAQ page, which answers frequently asked questions that applicants have. They have how-to guides that walk you through how to create your account, how to check the status of your application, etc. Then they have just some more information about working in government in general. So one page that I use pretty often is the occupations by college major. So again, if you're wondering how your degree might fit in government, you can look at all the different occupations that are broken out by college major. So you can find your specific major and look at open opportunities within that and find out what job series codes might correspond to your major. You can also explore different hiring paths. So if you're wondering how different hiring authorities might apply to you, for example, you're a veteran or you're a military spouse, you can look at how hiring paths might apply to you in positions that are available within those. So definitely recommend looking through the Help Center. And then as Amiko mentioned, they also have a glossary. So if any of these terms are confusing to you, you can look them up within that glossary. And then finally, we just want to mention OPM, or the Office of Personnel Management. So OPM is the Chief Human Resources Agency. So they really coordinate all things federal hiring for all of the federal government. So occasionally the outreach office at OPM will host webinars or provide resources for federal job seekers. I think they actually have a webinar series coming up throughout the summer that you can definitely check out on the events page on OPM or on USAjobs. They also have this outreach at opm.gov email if you have any really general questions about the hiring process or you're unsure where to go. So that concludes all the information that we have for you. We know that was a lot in a short period of time. So we're happy to hear any questions that you all have for us.
Hey, my name is Grace. I'm from Anita B, and I will be reading some of the Q&A questions. And if you have a question, feel free to pop it into the Q&A and we will answer it now. So Meredith is asking, for PMF, you mentioned the applications are received each fall. When are selection decisions then made? Or if you basically become a fellow, what's the general timeline for securing a position? As like, should you apply a year before graduation?
That's a good question. So you can apply during your final year of school. So if you know that you want to apply for the PMF program, it opens in the fall. So if you are graduating that spring, you can apply during your senior year of your program or the final year of your program. The timeline is once you're selected as a PMF finalist, you have 1 calendar year to secure a position. So once you're selected, you'll have a full year to go through that process of talking to different agencies and applying to different positions. And then if you don't secure a position in that year, you can apply again because you have up until 2 years after you graduate to apply for the program.
Awesome. I see one more. Oh, no. I see a question in the chat from Ashley. What do you recommend for students that do not have working experience in the work field?
That's a good question. Amiko, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. I think this question is asking, like, during the application process, maybe what to highlight on your resume or what types of positions to look for, et cetera, if you don't have experience in the work field. First and foremost, I definitely recommend reviewing that GS scale based on education. So if you have education alone, that can qualify you for different positions. So if you have, Amiko went over like the 5, 7, 11 levels, you can look at it all across different levels, but your education alone, as long as it's in a relevant field, could be helpful to getting a federal position. There's also plenty of opportunities that you can highlight on your resume that aren't necessarily work experience. So you can highlight specific classes that you've taken. You can highlight any internships you've had. Volunteer experience certainly counts as well. So anything that you've done, even if it's not a full-time work experience, you can still highlight on your resume as skills gained for a specific position. Amiko, is there anything else you want to add on this?
Just to add that it really does, especially in the federal resume, provide an opportunity for you to use kind of volunteer leadership, those types of positions to kind of show the experience that you have. So it's worth including those in whatever way it may be, or other examples of how you may have had those skills demonstrated in other types of positions or just kind of volunteer work.
Awesome. Thank you. So I see Anna had a question about, are all internships unpaid? I know, Amiko, you said in the chat, essentially, there are several internships that are paid, but you should basically check the job announcement to be absolutely certain of it, whether it's unpaid or not. Linda's asking, is having a LinkedIn presence and noting it on your resume beneficial?
This is Amiko. I think there are several agencies that do use LinkedIn and find out, I don't think it can hurt you at all to have that. So not all of them use it. Not all of them will necessarily go to LinkedIn, but some do. And so, having a presence there and noting it can be helpful if they're going to search out for additional information. Sometimes agencies have very specific processes of what they can and can't do as far as looking at additional information. So they may not, as part of the hiring process, be able to look at your LinkedIn profile. But if they're trying to recruit, or if they're working with, an outside firm to help kind of locate talent for hard to fill positions or something, they may come across you through LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. So we have a question from Jennifer. She lives in DC and she has 18 years of compliance work experience in federal funding programs. However, she's finding it hard to apply for any federal positions. Is age a factor that's preventing her from being considered? Do you have any advice for people like Jennifer who can possibly get hired by any federal agency in Washington, DC?
So I can start with this question. So to answer the first part, age should not be a factor in preventing you from being considered for these positions. Most positions are advertised based on the classification, so that GS level, education or years of work experience might be taken into consideration, but age should not be a factor in applying for these positions. I think the best overall advice that we could give in applying for federal opportunities is one, just kind of, as we mentioned, like begin your search as soon as possible and just do a really wide search. There's a lot of different agencies. There's a lot of different opportunities within it. You might have to do a really large search in order to find a position that could be a good fit for you. And then also just keep trying and applying to different positions. I know USAjobs can be really tricky the first couple of times that you try to use it. And it can kind of seem like a little bit of a black hole. That's what we hear from applicants often. So you might have to try several different times, applying at several different agencies. And then the final thing that I'll say too is just being really conscious of what's in the job announcement. So we did a panel with Department of Health and Human Services a couple of years ago, and they were saying that they posted a position and they had a really specific requirement around transcripts. For whatever reason, they needed the student's university listed in the transcript as a part of the letterhead. And so many students just took a screenshot of their transcript and cut that out. And a lot of students were emailing them saying, like, why wasn't I considered for this position? I thought I put everything that you needed me to apply. And they just said, it's just that little letterhead. And we couldn't consider you for the position just because you forgot this one part. And so I think that just goes to show that there's a lot of really specific information in the job announcement. So the best piece of advice is to make sure you read that thoroughly and use the exact requirements that they list in the job announcement, no matter how silly or small they might seem.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. Oh, I do see one more. I do see one more question. Would you have any advice for a human resource professional who stepped out of the workforce to raise a family and is now returning to the workforce? During the time of raising family, spare time was spent doing volunteer, community service, and project management unpaid work. I guess, do you have any advice for returnships or those that, haven't had, the steady in-work experience?
Similar to, I think, the other question, I would just be sure to list all of that on your federal resume. I think there's an opportunity to showcase here's how you stayed engaged, and here's what, if it's not been a formally paid position, kind of the skill development, advancement, relevancy to the position to which you're applying may still be very applicable. So it's worth highlighting that. And the federal resume really does give you an opportunity to highlight that in some helpful ways. And if you're looking the series code, I don't know if I spent much time on that. The series code for human resources is 200. So as you're looking through, it may be easier to you can find all the series codes on USAjobs, but it may be helpful to kind of look specifically for HR related positions there.
Thank you. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I want to thank Partnership for Public Service for this amazing webinar and the super, super helpful information. This webinar was made in partnership with meetab.org and Partnership for Public Service as a part of US of Technologists. If you want to find out more and stay up to date on some civic tech news, take a look at the chat and sign up for our mailing list, follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll see you around.